Yeah.
So it's good to see you all have power.
We all have power.
If nothing else.
Got all the hamsters running.
So we have no big. I don't have any big announcement. Well, one big announcement is the Mossberg Grant program went live yesterday or today, one of these days. So if you go to the website and or just Google MassDEP Mossberg Grant, it should come up. The webpage should come up. So that's out, and we're excited to have an opportunity to distribute money to worthy projects. Hopefully we'll have worthy projects coming in for that. So check it out, particularly, or recommend it to communities, groups along the coastline. It does have to be related to the response or prevention of marine oil spills. That's part of the MOSPR acronym. Well, actually, no, the M is for Massachusetts, but or marine oil spill preparation and response act. Or it might be Massachusetts oil spill. I don't remember. But check it out, and we'll see how that goes. And we are still working to get technical assistance grants started for the next fiscal year. So there will be more information for that coming as well. Other than that, we did get some questions from the LSP Association, or comments for Thursday. So I don't see Wendy here, but let her know that we're looking at them. The first one was, will DEP develop background concentrations for PFAS? One of the reasons we're supposed to be concerned about these compounds is that they are everywhere, persistent, and travel long distances. If that's the case, then like metals, there ought to be background thresholds. So for those kind of following along in the weeds and the details, you'll know that in fact we did look at soil background levels in the development of the Method 1 standards, and we looked at the Vermont Surficial Soil Background study, and we took that into account, and the numbers were specifically incorporated data from the Vermont study, but also we looked at smaller studies and work that has been done in Massachusetts, particularly around individual sites, which were very consistent with Vermont data, which gave us kind of more comfort that what Vermont was seeing there would be similar to what we would be seeing here. So for individual practicing LSPs that want to take into account or look at potential PFAS levels in soil that might be attributable to background, then if we use that source, certainly we would not have objections, I guess is one way of putting it, to other people looking at the same source. I mean, we used it, so it would be available for you guys to use. Yeah, we probably would, a more formal policy statement would be nice. Maybe just, turn that into a Q&A would be a good way of approaching it. And the kind of what the question referenced, that they are ubiquitous, they're everywhere, travel long distances, all of which is true. I try to be careful using that ubiquitous word, although it wasn't mentioned here in the question, because while we do see and acknowledge kind of background levels in superficial soil, probably from atmospheric deposition, the data does not support there being ubiquitous levels in groundwater. That we see a lot of groundwater results from the public water supply sampling and the private wells that we've looked at in the groundwater we've looked at, that clearly indicate that once you're kind of beyond the area affected by a particular source, we begin to see non-detects for PFAS in groundwater. So that, we're not at a point now, certainly, that we would say that we would establish groundwater background levels for PFAS, because what we're seeing is, we believe, generally, or even more than generally, almost always associated with a known or suspect source. And the ones that are confusing, we're still investigating as to where it's coming from. But I think we can differentiate between PFAS and groundwater from a particular source versus groundwater not affected by PFAS. So I think that's where we're going for now. Obviously, as we're going to be embarking on the PFAS private well sampling journey in the next year, we may collect data that will indicate that a groundwater background level is appropriate, but we're certainly not at that point yet. Number 2 was, what's the story with emergency EPA ID numbers? I had a site where I had an ER, emergency response, I guess, with a pump filling a frac tank with oily water in it. If I turned off the pump, I ran the risk of the oil migrating. I needed an ID number so I could offload the tank and keep pumping. My ER contractor said he was not allowed to use this number after the first 24 hours of response. People at EPA said DEP was responsible for issuing the numbers. DEP, who reportedly were responsible for issuing the numbers, didn't respond. People at DEP who did respond didn't know anything about the process, and the online procedure was non-intuitive. Someone at EPA eventually made an executive decision to issue the number without DEP input, so I didn't have to turn off the pump, but they made it clear that this was not SOP. I was lucky that someone at EPA was willing to make an executive decision and take responsibility. Well, there's a lot to unpack from that one. So first, the EPA ID number is for hazardous waste generators. So I guess this would be the small quantity generator. So the first thing I would say is, it's a hazardous waste RCRA thing. So, eventually we'll come out with kind of more written, I guess, written guidance in answer to this question. So take everything that I say now as a grain of salt, because it interacts with our program, but it's specifically not our program. But clearly there's an intersection here. And over the last couple of years, there has been a push, and EPA may be a bit disingenuous with this, in that that it's DEP's responsibility, but it's partly implementing the EPA program. So, but they are using these new online systems to give out hazardous waste generator numbers. I have heard that the online system is a bit quirky, and I probably wouldn't disagree with the non-intuitive comment that was there. And I think the question of the DEP reporting, some were not responsive and some were responsive but didn't know what was going on, is, I think, probably a question of not getting in touch with the right person. And I think that's certainly something that we can help with in putting out some guidance or Q&A, kind of leading people through the process. If you haven't been through it before and it's coming up in a situation where there's a short deadline that you're facing, then it would be nice to have some clear guidance focused on the waste site cleanup side of this, and how LSPs and PRPs and DEP staff as well can kind of coordinate with the hazardous waste folks to make sure that all of that goes smoothly. I know we've run into kind of similar things where we're working, and Michelle, you're probably familiar with this, with the fishing boats down in New Bedford Harbor, and where the waste oil that they generate, they need the EPA ID numbers, and kind of and working with owners of fishing boats to get those ID numbers because of the non-intuitive nature of the software that they're using. We've been doing, I believe our staff down there have been doing a lot of hand-holding with them to get that done, to make sure everybody is in compliance with those rules. So we do recognize that's kind of additional guidance would be helpful. So we'll try to get that together as well. And then there was a comment or a question about the EDP help email and about what appears something falling through the cracks. So we will contact the people that respond to that, those, and kind of reinforce that, even if it's a kind of, whatever the response is, they need to get back to people and acknowledge the question and help them to the extent possible. So those were the three things that came in. I think at least two will lead to additional guidance. Probably Q&As would be a good way of doing it. And then the third will be kind of checking on our part to make sure that the logistics of keeping track of phone calls and things being done while we're doing it remotely, trying to make sure things don't fall through the cracks. And we have the same, hopefully same level of kind of attention or with the BWSC information, BWSC regs, and that we want to make sure that the EDP question lines have an appropriate level of attention and response time. So that's what I've got for today. Do you guys have any questions? Or any thoughts, any experiences with the hazardous waste ID numbers and creating those? I think the big shift there, and it was probably a year and a half ago, or maybe 2 years, year and a half ago, was where the transporter, either rules changed or clarified that, but the transporter no longer can, continue over the long term using their number for the small quantity generators, that kind of the one-offs, and EPA and the DEP hazardous waste program want the actual generators to have an ID number. So I think that was a shift that people are still kind of still dealing with. And if you don't do this very often, then it comes as a surprise even a couple of years into this now.
We've had some discussions in my office about how to fill out the online, and it is a tedious process from what I hear from people who are more computer savvy than I am. But one of the issues that came up recently was trying to get rid of drums of cuttings from test borings, I guess investigation derived waste, where the entity doing the drilling was a potential buyer of the property, so not the owner. So I guess from the owner's perspective, they own the drums. And there's no place for an other person to fill out as the generator. It had to be the owner. And I guess we did go back and forth. It was either EPA or DEP on how to fill it out, but I guess the resolution was that the potential buyer could fill out the owner line on the form, which doesn't seem right, and there was no room for qualifying who that was. But so if there's any way to modify the template, there should be provision for someone who's not the owner of the property, who was the generator of the material, even maybe it was just for investigation derived waste.
Yep.
Did DEP prepare the online form, or was it EPA?
I wasn't involved in that, so I don't know for sure. But since that is one of those programs that DEP is implementing the EPA program. I would suspect that EPA gave us the money to, well, actually, no, because this is all part of was it Record ID? So I think this is a national thing. So the overall interface, I think, is being applied, in all states. So I suspect it would be EPA. And one of the issues I know that has come up certainly in the down in New Bedford with the fishing vessels is that it might not fit very nicely with, or it raises complications with situations where you now have state-only hazardous waste. So waste oil, as you know, is not a hazardous waste under EPA, but is under Massachusetts. So I suspect because it's a national system, there are also complications when it needs to be tweaked or somehow taken into account state variations on the theme.
So is what you're saying that DP could not modify the form because it's a national form?
I don't know,
Okay.
but I'll certainly pass this along.
Okay.
But I think whether it's our form or whether it's the EPA's form, if it's our form, it's still within the context of the EPA system. So it in either case, getting it modified is probably not as easy as it would be to say modify a Wayside Cleanup EDEP form, which is solely within our control.
All right. Well, if it can be done, it would make things a little easier.
Yeah, I can certainly pass that along.
Thank you.
Any other experiences with it?
Several of our dispensing clients have just preemptively applied for EPA ID numbers so that if there's a spill and a response has to happen in the middle of the night, they can simply transport the waste with the ID number already. So I would recommend that LSPs consider encouraging their clients who might have releases like that at their sites to do that preemptively so that there's no delay in response.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any PFAS thoughts? Background? No. Okay. Any other issues? Yes, iPhone. Did you have something? Yep. Okay. Okay, you guys are all very low energy today.
From watching the debate.
I can search the web for that. Just tap the search tip below.
Hold on, my digital assistant wants to help me do something.
I have a unofficial PIP question to the group.
Okay.
So we have a phase 2 report coming up on one of my projects. No, I won't even say that. A project I heard about.
You're asking for a friend.
A friend's project.
A friend's project.
And so with COVID, and the recent COVID experience we had was we submitted the draft of the report on EDP in advance of the PIP meeting and that actually went well. Does the phase 2 have to be submitted in draft form via the BWSC 126 form in advance of the PIP meeting? Or because if you look at, the Q&A, the only thing, and it lists all the reports that are subject to PIP, and it's the draft PIP plan, and then it's all the other milestone reports, plans. It doesn't say draft. So can the phase 2 comprehensive site assessment be submitted in order to meet the deadline, as a final report and still have the PIP public meeting, and then if necessary, it could be revised? Or does it have to be submitted in draft in advance of the PIP meeting? Thoughts from the group?
Could you fill out a delay in compliance with phase 2 and then not submit it before the meeting?
I mean, that's an option, but not a desirable one.
Hypothetically.
So the deadline is coming up for the,
I mean,
for the
yeah.
final phase 2.
Yeah, I mean, the deadline is in December, so it's not tomorrow.
Yeah.
But if you have to get it done in advance of the PIP, that adds, you know, the extra week to put the ad in the paper, and then the 2 weeks in advance of the PIP meeting, and then you lose several. You probably lose a month with all the public notices that are required. And that's not to say it couldn't be done in time, even submitting the PIP, but I'm just trying to see what my options are.
Is there another way to make it publicly available and to let people know where it is?
Well, with the COVID restrictions, there was a Q&A. So the repositories are still receiving mail, so we still submit it to the repository, but to make it more widely available, the draft is submitted on EDP by our 126 form.
So do you have the draft that can be uploaded now?
Okay, I'm thinking about what I need to do and by when at this point. Oh, my friend of mine is.
Yeah.
Ella, can you mail a hard copy to like the key petitioner and a couple of the municipal officials? At least they would have a hard copy in their hand.
Yeah, but is it the draft or the final?
The draft.
But yeah,
You're still subject to all of the timelines for public notice. That doesn't help the.
Because
And
Michelle's
yes.
seen plenty of my drafts in the past.
so the kind of making things available aside, your problem that the scheduled PIP meeting is very close to the deadline for the final phase 2. So what are the deadlines? The deadline for the phase 2 is
mid-December.
is mid-December, and the PIP meeting is scheduled for
It hasn't been scheduled yet.
so it really is, you know, to be blunt, it's the fact that the PIP meeting hasn't been scheduled yet, and you're coming up on the deadline for the final phase 2, that it's reaching a point where you can't meet the intent of the public involvement requirements to
No,
give.
I didn't say can't. I didn't
Well,
say can't.
okay, it's
I'm just
becoming
saying,
more
how much-
difficult.
How much time do I have? That's all.
So since you can upload the draft to EDP, and as was mentioned, you can mail out to the municipal officials, then I think getting the draft out, and getting into people's hands as early as possible would be good. And trying to schedule the PIP meeting kind of before the deadline for the final certainly would be a good step. I mean, the goal would be to actually give the public a real opportunity to make comments on the draft before the final is due. I mean, if you have the meeting on December 12th and the final is due on December 13th, are you really giving them, a valid opportunity to comment on it?
Elliot, Barry Fogel here. May have missed some of it, but do the COVID orders not extend any of your deadlines?
No, they don't.
You've already confirmed that.
So
you-
a PIP
you-
meeting after we submit the phase 2 wouldn't follow the intent of the.
No, but there's no extension of the timeline for submitting the phase 2 from any of the COVID tolling?
I don't believe so.
You may want to look into that.
No, not this late.
No, but the period of time wouldn't have been extended for the period that the emergency was in place?
No,
No.
that was back in July and so forth, when people were bumping up against deadlines with no preparation. Now I think everything's back on track.
No, I get that. I'm just suggesting that it's like a tolling. That my understanding of the emergency order was that there was a very broad application of any deadline under any state regulation, blah, 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 is extended by the period of time that the tolling, that the emergency is in place. I'm just wondering if it didn't push Elliot's phase 2, that you said it's a phase 2.
He's a friend of mine.
Yes, no, I mean, Elliot's hypothetical.
Yeah.
That, as I understood it, that there's a deadline that's regulatory, and that regulatory deadlines were extended by the emergency orders.
No, I mean, to be,
No.
oh, Luke, no, oh, good, Luke's here. Like,
Yeah,
Luke will talk.
Explain to us, Luke.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's true. I mean, it's now been a few months, and so I haven't looked at those orders in a while, but we were pouring through those orders when they were effective, very much trying to figure out those issues. And my recollection is that they didn't extend deadlines that are built into regulations without further action by the agency. We felt that we had enough flexibility under the MCP that we didn't need to take any such additional action through, the various notices of delay and other, possibilities that we have under the MCP. So I think the answer to your question, Barry, is that the position of the agency and our view is that those deadlines were not extended.
So exactly. So okay, if that's the case, then you're saying that there was enough flexibility in the notice of delay provisions already built into the regs?
Right. I mean, we put out that COVID guidance, which expressed our intent to exercise enforcement discretion and not take enforcement action under certain circumstances. Now that we have a phase 2 that's due, I guess, in a few months, we're back to, the new normal, as it were.
But if Elliot's friend had any kind of disruption in the work they were doing during the COVID emergency, he or she would be entitled to file some kind of notice of delay, which would maybe push the time out sufficiently to allow for the process to take place.
If it was due then, and if the notice of delay had been filed yet, then yes, but I don't think any of that would work at this point.
No,
Even if the field work or the other work in preparing the report was disrupted by other factors.
No, I just don't think the orders work that way.
No,
Well,
not the orders, the rules.
the notice of delay is still an option. It just, the reasoning behind it would be different. But as Joel mentioned earlier, that is one option. If there's not enough time between when the phase 2 final is due and the draft would be put out for PIP purposes, that is an option to file a notice of delay.
Yeah. So I think part of the recommendations would be, it would probably be good to talk to somebody in the regional office to let them know kind of what's going on. Filing the notice of delay, doesn't, protect you from, potential enforcement actions.
no, I don't need a notice of delay. So
Yeah.
let's just take that off.
Okay.
But where I was going with that though, is that, if the choices are, filing the phase 2 at the deadline, in a manner that, if filing it, which means that the public doesn't have an appropriate chance to review it and make comments on it as part of the PIP plan, then that's one.
Jesus, Mary, and Joseph.
But that's all three of them, yes.
So the standard comment period is 20 days after you file, after the PIP meeting.
Mhm.
So what you said earlier was if you had the PIP meeting a few days before the deadline, you could then file the final. So are you saying that I could file the final in advance of the comment period or during the comment period? Or do I got to wait the whole comment period?
Well, let me clarify what I said. There's a difference between what you can do and what you can do in a way that meets the regulatory requirements. So, yes, your EDEP will not prevent you from filing the phase 2, by the deadline, while the public comment period on the draft is still running. You can do that. It will allow you to do that. The question then is, okay, you've met one requirement of the regs, which is filing the phase 2 by its deadline, but you have not met another part of the regs, which is allowing for an appropriate public comment period consistent with the PIP requirements. So
you could always submit a revised phase 2 if you had to.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say, Elliot. Your friend could file the phase 2 and then file an amended one based on comments and let the PIP group know that you were meeting the deadline, but you absolutely want to include comments they may submit.
So that's one way of going about it, and that creates a violation of the regulations. And what that says to the public is that, and this may not be the intent, but the public could look at that and say that my comments are, yes, you say you still may revise it pursuant to public comment, but how much do you value my comments if you just went ahead and filed the final anyway? And we can't make you revise it. So there's a public perception issue with that. Another option is to to go through with the public comment period as stipulated in the regulations, which might mean that the phase 2 is submitted late, and the notice of delays indicates that, yes, this, here's we're going to file this instead of December 15th, we're going to file it on January 15th, because we want to make sure that we have time to hear and incorporate any public comments.
And if you file the draft in advance of the regulatory deadline, I know that doesn't meet the deadline, but I guess that would show something to support the notice of delay.
Well, Elliot, I was going to say, depending upon your friend's relationship with the PIP, could you send them, a registered letter saying, look, this is what we're up against. This is what we would like to do. We value your input, but we will incorporate your changes into an amended phase 2.
You could, but that doesn't sound like what Paul's interpretation of compliance is.
Well,
you're going to be in violation of one thing or another. You're either going to be in violation of the phase 2 deadline or the PIP requirements. I'm suggesting that maybe you could just get the PIP's cooperation, and your friend could in this situation.
Okay. And I have enough to think about it.
Yeah, and I'm not, and one of the reasons
I'll tell my friend about it.
One of the reasons your hypothetical friend might want to kind of contact the region is that, I can't say anything about how likely it is that DEP would take enforcement action for any of this. I mean, that all of that is run out of the regions, and I'm not going to speak for them on this. But we do want to make sure that, for the public involvement, that people have a real opportunity to comment on these things. So, if this is something that I think you might want to talk to somebody in the regional office to find out how to best meet the intent of the regulations. In doing this, even though the situation you find yourself in may mean that some kind of bureaucratic aspect of the regulations might have a violation.
Okay. That was helpful.
But
Thank you.
I certainly wouldn't kind of downplay the public involvement part of it as being the lesser of the requirements.
Got it.
Well, that was an interesting discussion. Yeah, I mean that seriously. I mean, these are the day-to-day issues that you guys deal with, and it's nothing. It's really nice in black and white. So, anybody else have an interesting moral or procedural question? No.
Yeah, going back to PFAS, Paul, quickly. So are you imagining that every location where a fire department, municipal fire department, extinguished an automobile fire or a fuel release on the side of the road, hundreds and thousands of such locations would be locations where the municipality is the responsible party? I mean, as time goes on, people are going to start, unraveling all of that history of firefighting. Has the department thought about that?
Well, as you know, Barry, the department has thought about that. We have had particular cases that have come up, and what certainly we are struggling with is the if there are cases where public or private water supply wells have elevated levels of PFAS above what is now the standard, and that poses a risk of harm, public health, to the people that are using that water. So, I mean, those are the facts on the ground, in the ground. And when we come across those situations, our first concern certainly are making sure that the people that are drinking the water are being protected. And obviously, for your clients, the people that you work with, it also comes down to who's responsible for doing what and who's paying for it. And that there are legal aspects of that which I'm not the most qualified person to talk about. And I'm looking at Luke, and he's not asking Luke to respond. Just being very careful of what I'm saying is that on a case-by-case basis, obviously there are kind of legal definitions of who are responsible parties and kind of what they're responsible for doing and why. And that may get complicated, and there may be some gray areas there that haven't been completely worked out yet. From an operational standpoint, I would say that not all of those roadside fires are going to be problematic, as looking at the standards and the way that we're implementing it. They're, not that it narrows it down, as much as you would really like, but this becomes a problem in GW1 areas where there are drinking water is the issue, and not all areas. So and hopefully we're going to find through the sampling that will be going on with the private water supply wells that it is even these small localized firefighting operations don't cause bigger scale problems with the neighborhood, but those are things that are going to be worked out.
Yeah, I mean, looking at it from the standpoint of, on the roadway, fighting this individual vehicle fire, you get the runoff of the water from the firefighting with the AFFF into storm drains or into wetlands or into adjacent properties, and you've got soil impacts too. You guys have, so it's going to unravel backwards, I guess. Once you get past the drinking water part of it, you're going to end up with broader.
Yeah, and I mean that's clearly one of the reasons why we had the Take Back program, to try to get the legacy, older, problematic foam out of circulation, out of use, to at least stem the any ongoing problems. And to the extent that you guys have contacts with local fire departments who have not taken advantage of that, there's always there will probably always be an opportunity, but no fire department should be using the old legacy foam at this point. That's really inviting kind of problems stemming from that. And then the historic use of it, we're going to, I think those issues will certainly work out at the beginning on a case-by-case basis. I think we do have some history of dealing with accidents and runoff from material that goes into water supplies and wetlands and things like that. And you look at what was done in the past, who has been held responsible, to kind of estimate, foretell who's going to be held responsible in the future. But
there's no thought of an exemption like the one for application of pesticides or herbicides for proper use of AFFF concentrate back in the day.
Well, so a couple things. One is that exemption, the bigger, better, more comprehensive exemptions like that are statutory, not regulatory. So to a large extent, that's out of our hands and in the hands of the state legislature. The other thing is that from a that doesn't change, that changes the problem, but it doesn't eliminate the problem. That if material had been applied, and it did affect a drinking water supply well, and something has to be done to deal with the contamination in that well, the fact that it costs money and somebody has to do it, still, it may change the equations and it may be clearer for some people for whom the exemption then would apply, but it still doesn't change the fact that somebody is going to have to pay and deal with the contaminated water supply issue. And in the worst case, it means that the homeowner is now stuck with that, is one potential. And so it's not an easy or simple problem, as you know, and you don't necessarily, if it ends up being something that the city gets stuck with, or the municipalities get stuck with, or a homeowner gets stuck with, then it would be better for that to be dealt with in a more comprehensive fashion than kind of piecemeal exempting one but not dealing with the others. It's not going to be easy or clear.
Actually, if I could ask a question, there are patterns. I'm not an LSP, so I don't, or a PRP, hopefully not yet. But there are patterns that, you can perceive in the way that sites get reported. Maybe when a site is being sold, a property is being sold, the buyer maybe looks around when there's been an accident. So to the extent that this foam is still being used, I suppose that can raise questions. when contamination is found in the drinking water supply, as Paul talked about. So there are patterns that you see that sort of describe how sites get reported. I'm thinking about a roadside spill 20 years ago along Highway 2. All right, suppose over the last 20 years, there's been, I don't know, 20 or 200 roadside spills along Highway 2. Highway 2 is not being sold. There's no land transactions. There's no drinking water wells along Highway 2. I'm curious, is there any sort of normal or natural mechanism by which sites would get reported along roadsides that way? Or, just for the sake of argument, is this really, a solution in search of a problem? We're just not getting.
No, look, and so here's how I see that raising its ugly head is that because water is applied with the foam and it runs off the road into a water body eventually through storm drains or otherwise, as you work backwards from the testing of a water supply well, let's say, and then you pursue that into nearby water bodies, if you find PFAS in a nearby water body, at some point, maybe 2 years, 5 years from now, the experience we're all going to have is people are going to start dotting their downgrading property status reports with dots on a map of where fires were fought, of vehicle fires or spills or something. So that's how I see the problem eventually coming around full circle, is that those, remote areas of Route 2, maybe not, but many roadways in more populated areas will become identified as PFAS sources for down gradient properties. And the municipality is going to be the target because they fight fires. So is that right? Did you see how that sort of becomes tied in? People aren't going to go test soil along the side of Route 2 in a remote area, but they'll be looking for where did this PFAS come from? If not from the septic system, maybe it was when they fought the fire when that car was burning there in 1992.
Yeah, and I just don't know whether, Paul would know this, the technical people would know this better than I do, whether we think that kind of dot connecting is possible based on the information that we have, given the number of fires that have occurred over the years.
It's going to vary on the situation, but the situation Barry describes where you have, I wouldn't be surprised if something like this comes up in the private well sampling that we'll be doing, where you end up with a private well that has elevated levels of PFAS for what appears to be unknown reasons. They're not near any industrial sources at all, and where we if they go and talk to their neighbors and say, look, we got elevated PFAS, when the state sampled, you should ask the state whether they'll sample your wells, or you should go and sample your well anyway, because this might be a problem. So you end up with a neighborhood where several people are now sampling their well because one person had an elevated level, and you get additional high hits. And as you backtrack it, maybe you see a pattern, maybe it leads to an obvious, say, fairly recent, dramatic fire that everybody remembers where foam was used. So, and if you go beyond that point, you don't see any PFAS in the groundwater. So, that situation, I'm hoping it's not going to be very common, but I would be a little Pollyannish to think that it never will. And I think we've already seen potential cases where, it could be, what you're seeing is attributable to the use of foam for the fires. The Bourne Rotary overturned tanker trucks where the folks at Joint Base Cape Cod came out and applied foam to prevent the tanker truck from exploding. 2 tanker trucks, 2 separate. That led to a plume going down towards the bay of PFAS that hit a number of private wells. So it's not, the fact that we knew that event occurred, those events occurred, and you could work down from there. It doesn't change the fact it could very well have started at the toe of the plume and worked its way back up. So the question would be, then as Barry is asking, well, then who do you hold responsible, and who is going to pay for the water treatment, the POET systems that go into the private wells? And the potential parties would be the individual homeowners. You say, well, you're on your own, you deal with it yourselves. It could be the people that responded, the firefighters that responded to that. It could be the owner of the tanker truck in that one example, because they caused the release or potential release. They caused the firefighters to come in to apply what is kind of normal, apply their normal operating procedures. It could be the municipality, if it kind of broader, not just the firefighters, because if we take everybody else out of the equation, who's left? Government. So it could be the municipalities. You have to deal with it, or the state. The state has to deal with it. There may be other parties that might be on the table, but when it comes down to it, somebody is either going to have to drink contaminated water, or somebody is going to have to pay to have the water treated.
And one reason I raised
Paul,
this,
while that's true, I mean, clearly there's a public policy problem with designating fire departments as responsible parties for performing their authorized duties, especially since most of those applications, were they not long before maybe the health risks were known, and certainly before any of the regulations regarding PFAS were around?
Yeah, Matt, to be clear, I'm not saying that this is how one would do it. I'm saying that those are the parties involved, and there aren't a lot of kind of various options.
I agree.
I was just laying it out.
Since
Right.
Joel's in the room and Karen is in a public policy position, it sounds like a bill to somehow protect municipal fire departments from their historic actions might be on the legislative agenda.
Well,
and Matt, if I can, Paul, that there is the Tort Claims Act, the Massachusetts statute, does have an exemption from tort liability for fire departments that fight fires in a non-negligent fashion, but that doesn't help them, presumably, with the otherwise caused part of 5A5.
Yeah.
And so, number one, and number two, the Stowe Firefighting Academy, they actually got some funding this year from I don't know how, I'm curious about it, but there was some funding to support the work that they're doing to investigate and remove soil and sediment. And, that was a focused actual place where people went to play with foam. But I am only raising this just that as the department speaks with legislators and legislators speak with municipalities, that I foresee a large municipal liability chunk coming their way from the downstream effects of having fought fires, not just on vehicle fires and spills, but lots of fire departments, I'm certain, in the 70s and 80s were fighting difficult house fires, would probably use AFFF to, rather than sending personnel into a building that was in risk of collapsing and wanted to be able to end the conflagration. So, it goes not just to vehicle and roadside stuff, but to residential and commercial property fires too.
Yeah, and all I'm saying, and the recognizing the lawyers in the room are far more informed about this. That as Barry indicated, there are some things that have exemptions or protections under tort law, but there are a lot of different kind of legal liabilities that are out there that I'm not qualified to get into the muck into all of that, and that they may be they're certainly complex, subtle. I would venture to say, from my non-lawyer viewpoint, they may be contradictory in some cases. So all of which is to say that it's going to take some time to work out kind of how it actually plays out.
And I'm raising it, my final comment is I'm raising it with this group so that the LSP community and the department, as this growing PFAS issue continues to expand exponentially, that you keep in mind the very significant impact liability for municipalities would have in firefighting history.
Yeah.
You know, no question the department has the authority to look for someone to be responsible for PFAS in drinking water. And if it's a municipality that fought a fire, you know, you're like, hey, that's what 21E is about. But I hope there's some, I don't know if the word is sympathy, but some recognition of that early on, and you raise it with the legislators that you speak with and the LSPs do as well, and trying to find a way to anticipate not jamming municipalities with this gigantic liability that I think is coming down the pipe.
Yeah, and with, you know, I would just hope that, you know, any kind of thought be given to kind of dealing with this, and I think that's where we're trying to deal with it in a comprehensive way, and looking at the big picture and recognizing that, you know, the overarching goal is to make sure that people are drinking clean water, and that liability is applied, you know, fairly and appropriately. How not just kind of knee-jerk reactions to particular incidents. And it's not going to be easy, because it's not an easy subject.
Right. And to reinforce something that you said earlier, Paul, I think, which is really important, which is that any, you know, public policy discussion that talks about what liabilities fire departments should face, I think to be robust, a good discussion, good advocacy for that matter, would also include proposals as to how to pay for private water supplies that are contaminated by firefighting incidents, if that is in fact what we're going to be finding. Again, you know, 21E CERCLA was created as a compromise to expand liability beyond tort law, but not have the public pay for cleanups. It's something in between. And so again, to the extent that anyone advocates for increased liability protections, I guess the question for any policymaker would be, well then, okay, if there is a problem, if there is contaminated water out there, who is going to pay for it? Will it be the public? Will these be publicly funded cleanups? Will we focus on homeowners? What will we do? Or will we do nothing and let, you know, people clean up their own water?
Yeah. And, you know, as good bureaucrats, you know, what we want, which is in some ways similar to, I think, what LSPs want, you know, we want clear rules. We want good direction. We want to know what's expected of us, and we want to have the opportunity to do what's expected of us. And, you know, my parting thought on this before we, because we're left to 10, is, you know, I look at the definitions of owner operator under Chapter 21E, and, you know, the complexities that exist in that, to see, you know, just how complicated and subtle and confusing to a layman, you know, mucking around with liability exemptions and clauses and conditional, you know, circumstances might be. So anything that clarifies it and gives direction and gives an appropriate and satisfying outcome that it's fair and equitably administered is good for me.
Yeah, I think, Paul, you know, you were conclusive on one point, and I think it's unarguable that someone has to pay. You know, there are costs involved, and they're going to have to come from somewhere, and that's a problem that has to be resolved. The other thing, though, I would look ahead to, and the point maybe the other point behind my comment to Joel was that, you know, the fire departments have, you know, you're getting them to replace their firefighting materials with new firefighting materials with, as yet, no known health consequences. But of course, the law of unforeseen consequences, kind of dictates that your successor or someone a generation from now will suddenly find that, oh my gosh, now we have this new threat. So I think there's something to be thought about there in terms of that liability. I mean, right? You keep finding new and emerging contaminants.
Well,
keeping us all employed.
With the AFFF, with the firefighting foam, that day of reckoning, is not as far in the future as one might imagine, because already, what was switched out, the legacy foam had the longer chain PFAS compounds. The better foam has shorter chain PFAS compounds. So there are certainly people out there arguing that the shorter chain PFAS are, while maybe better, that's only relative, and you still should be concerned about that. So yeah, unintended consequences.
I do want to respond to Matt in that, Karen and I do try to keep a certain dividing line between us, but also where our firm is dealing with a major PFAS issue related to a house fire, it's more important that I try to stay silent on this.
Yeah, no, and that is an unfair position to put Joel in.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to put Joel into a position. I was just saying it's a line of communication. It's something that maybe our community, both the MassDEP and LSPs, can act as knowledgeable people to help inform our legislators about the potential issues that we're seeing and some of the implications.
Yeah, my understanding is that there are bills at the currently under consideration at the legislature that, including I think Wendy had talked about this in a previous meeting about establishing a PFAS. I'm going to use the wrong words, but coordinating committee at the state level. So there are, for all of you acting as private citizens or representing your organizations, certainly have the opportunity to kind of look at what's going on, what's being considered, and work with your legislators and suggest things that would help improve the legislation. So with that, I'm going to call it an end, certainly of the official thing and of the official meeting.